player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. We have a brand new character dropping this week. It's Maevia Wezeette, the brand new ice bow unit being added to the game. And today's character review, pretty standard topics. We'll go through the overview, the commander effects, a stat overview, the report card where we can start to summarize a little bit of what you should know about her, some general thoughts, should you pull, and all the normal topics beyond that when it comes to analyzing her abilities and equipment and things like that. Now, for the character overview, brand new ice unit added with the unique main job of Silver Wolf Archer. She does have the High Dragoon and Soldier subjobs. She does equip bows as part of that job-based vision card group as well. She equips hats, cloths, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 2 as a 100 cost unit, and my faith recommendation is anywhere from 50 to 97. This will probably change a little bit depending upon the meta because she is a very frostbite-oriented unit. She's got a decently high proc chance for that status element, so it's again a little debatable how much faith you realistically need, but anywhere in that range I think you're good. Now she does have a maxed range of 6 squares away, but being a missile unit, there is an extra range component to this, and she does have essentially range +2 permanently on her main passive, so that max range is realistically 8 squares away. She does have 2 AoE abilities and 2 single target abilities on that main job. From a resistance perspective, the only negative here is the negative 15% to strike. She's neutral to pierce, 20% to magic, and the 10% to both slash and missile. And then from an ailment perspective, 50% to both confusion and immobilize, also the 10% to disable. The immobilize one is very common nowadays. I like that she has that. Most missile units probably should. But I'm not terribly concerned about these because she should theoretically be one of the last units getting hit on your team, and so I wouldn't expect a lot of ailment counterplay between her and the enemies. Now for the mastery ability, they gave her 20% missile attack resistance penetration at all times, 40% reaction block as well. For the dream ability, it's 15% unit risk, 15% crit rate, and 30% acquired AP. This unit also comes with a commander effect, and it is for the dual game mode. And for ice units, they get ice attack 15 and crit damage 15. And then for bow, gun, and glove units, they get slash and magic resistance of 10% and acquired AP of 40%. I'll be honest, the stats of this, I'm not really blown away with. These are okay stats. They're better than nothing, obviously, but the in-game ability, I think, is really what's very nice here, that when you fall below half health, you'll activate haste and 50% reaction block rate for 3 turns. That kind of mid-fight haste certainly can turn a team fight. Now we get into the stat overview. Again, this is a missile-oriented, long-ranged bow unit, so there is a kind of archetype that I'm expecting from a stat perspective, and she absolutely nails it. They skew a little bit lower on their innate HP levels. The attack can be kind of variable. She's slightly above average, but not crazy high on the base attack. The base dexterity, though, is among one of the higher ones in the game, which does affect her crit rate, which is a very noteworthy trait to look for when you're talking about these missile units. And the innate base luck is above average. Nothing crazy, though, but certainly in a bucket that I'd expect. I'm pretty happy with these base stats considering what I was expecting from a missile unit. When we incorporate the board nodes, the mastery abilities, things of that nature, the dexterity continues to fly off the chart. She is an immensely good crit rate unit overall. The luck ends up in a very good spot too. That to me is really the most noteworthy part of this character. The rest of the stats you can make up for in a variety of other ways. When we get to the agility though, this is also a very nice thing for this unit. They do tend to skew a little bit higher than normal on the agility side of things, and without passives they come in at about 84 with those vision cards equipped, and upwards of about 91, which is realistically like the top of what most characters get for innate agility. Now we get to the other stats here. That critical rate cannot be understated. Not only does she have an incredible amount of dexterity, but she's got the crit rate nodes on her board as well for it, that she is virtually top of the charts for crit rate at the moment. The crit avoidance rate is fine. Luck stat certainly helps put it in a good spot, but nothing noteworthy. The innate accuracy, though, is very far above average. It's not exceptionally high, but it is absolutely way above where most units tend to be. She's arguably one of the more accurate units in the game, but certainly still requires a little bit of help to hit this level of evade that we're also seeing in the game. And her evasion with luck scaling equips is on the bottom of that gradient for any kind of pseudo evade potential, and I personally don't consider it because ice as an element didn't really get any of those early mono element vision cards that some of these other units rely on to get to those very high luck values, so I'm not expecting that for her when it comes to evasion. To me, luck is really for her accuracy here. Now we get to the report card. The effective HP for me is a C. It's average. There's no defense or spirit, no AoE res. She does get upwards of 27 unit res. There's no wide resistance at all either, and no kind of percent reductions to magic or physical types, no honeycombs. So it's actually kind of on the lower side compared to most new units, which again, we kind of expect for missile units. The survivability though is a C plus for me. I might be a little harsh on this, because she does have a 4-hit general barrier, and she is courage capable. Those are kind of the bare minimums that make for some good survivability, but she doesn't have an innate heal back. There is a passive ability that you can equip, though, that will give her one, but there's also no kind of damage absorb within her kit, and missing some of the checkboxes that we look for, like honeycomb barriers and other kinds of survivability buffs that she just doesn't really have. Now, that being said, she is a very long range, which is part of her survivability, and being kind of a high proc rate frostbite user, I think the idea is based that by the time enemies get to her, they're probably running or low or out of AP at that point, which absolutely would help her survivability. So I think in practice, she's probably a little bit higher than this, but based on the numbers, not the strongest unit from a survivability perspective overall. For me, the damage is an A-. It's not amazing, and I might be going a little bit high on the damage, but I don't really see any red flags here. I mean, she's got 40 AoE res pen, 20 missile pen. She can get 40 defense pen on a passive, but you will get 40% on an attack, so you can get upwards of 80 there, self-contained within the kit. She does have a 25% ice imperil and an AoE imperil on the same ability, and a 30% missile imperil on a different ability. That limit break that she has is also a physical barrier break, and will remove what we call to protect 2.0 at this point. So there's a lot of things here that can help her do the damage that she wants to. It's just going to come down to what vision cards and espers and whatnot you have equipped on her. But overall, I don't think I see any red flags here. And I'll kind of get through the rest of these rather quickly because we did sort of cover them already in the lead up to this. The agility for me is a B+, and it's only this way because I don't think you'll always have that agility passive active. Should you have it active, this is an A grade. She's a very fast unit. But without it, she's just a step below. The accuracy for me is an A- and a great innate accuracy. You'll always have the passive equipped that does have her accuracy attached to it, but there isn't really any kind of accuracy buff or guaranteed hit. She does have an increased 30% hit chance on her lowest AP ability, but that's not a very strong like modifier ability. That might come in clutch as the fight's winding down when you really need to like improve the odds of hitting an enemy, but you certainly are still going to have to invest a certain minimum amount of accuracy into this unit to make her hit the top tier stuff. Evasion for me, B-. The movement for me is a B, and this is probably one of the most interesting things about her. Her unique weapon gives her move -1. That's not in her kit innately, which is kind of a buck of the trend, what most missile units have had as of late, where they typically come with move -1 innately in their passives. She does not. It's only on her weapon. And technically, she does have a High Dragoon buff that can also give her move +1. So there's some interesting things you can do there from a movement perspective. The auto ease of use, though, for me is a D. And I always kind of say this for a lot of missile units. The concept of range is very difficult for an average player to get down when you consider that you have a certain active range all the time, and then you have a extra range on a second buff, but then she's a bow unit, which means there's trajectory that can affect her range as well. And then you consider that she's got a lot of good passives, but you can only equip 2. It might be tough for some people to pick what's the best one at all times. You do have to tune her a little bit for being an adequate glass cannon, which I think you can. I think she should be able to do some pretty significant damage, but you have to build it that way. And I think her second teammate buff actually has some AI issues with certain teammates. So there's a lot of things there that I think can be difficult for an average player just to plug and play her from an auto ease of use perspective, particularly when you consider the fact that you can be very easily punished because of her innate bulk, that if you get her out of position or do something wrong from an AI perspective, you don't really have that much wiggle room to self-correct it within the fight. Now, the game disruption for me is a B-. She is a great unit versus what we call the Shrekdeath meta. It's a Shreka and Xdeath, but seemingly very ingrained in ice teams on the JP side of things. And while I think you can build her outside of those ice teams, that seems to be where her main strength is. And so from that perspective, there are ways to still get around her that, although she's a valuable tool for certain accounts, I'm not expecting her to like upend the entire game itself. The passives for me are a B. There are excellent choices, but you can only pick 2. I'm probably being kind of harsh here, but I don't like the fact that she's a little bit spread thin on a couple of them. The counter ability is an A. She's got good old-fashioned reflex, where she can dodge both physical and magic types on a 15% proc chance. The overall jumping kit for me is an A-. She does have adequate utility for missile units, some valuable battle effects, but the final grade is a B. And it's not this is a bad unit. She's genuinely not. She does have a very good role to play and offers good value for it, but missile has already proven to be kind of finicky with unit and Jaden. Its main upside is absolutely the anti-Shreka in the short term, and you'd think that maybe Jaden kind of already solved that, but clearly he didn't, and I think that Maevia's introduction absolutely can. But even then, I have questions, because one of the most popular Shreka teams prior to Shrekdeath was Shrek Sephiroth, and I have questions on how this team does versus him. Either way, the general thoughts here, again, the mono ice is the biggest upside. You have that 25% ice in peril on that big diamond. The Dad Bomb vision card, which is her unique vision card that comes out with her the week after, is also 35 ice attack, which is kind of odd for a job-based vision card. It's the first of its kind like that. And she obviously does have natural synergies with those units as gun units and Sword Red Mage and some of the other great synergies. She does bring adequate utility, as I mentioned, with the 50% buff efficacy on a certain attack. What that basically means is that when an enemy buffs themselves, they'll only get half the effect of it. But I do believe debuff weakening can reduce even that number, so I have questions upon how impactful that can be. She can dispel follow-ups, though, on her diamond ability, which is very noteworthy. You can also dispel damage absorb buffs as well. 25% agility and decrease AP consumption of 30% to those teammates. She can decrease enemy unit resistance penetration on hit after her self-buff as well, and that's really the big thing about her. She's very much anti-unit attackers, which is Shrek and Xdeath. You're going to hear that again in just a couple minutes here. But we mentioned the AoE and Missile in Peril. She can grant herself courage not only to herself, but also to an ally. But I do have AI questions on how she might use this if you have an ally like Gilgamesh next to you that maybe already has the courage in effect. I don't know if all of these units will have that problem, but it's something that I have to think about a little harder. I do think she's definitely Glass Cannon-esque. I think you have to tune her for a certain amount of offensive output to really kind of like get your bang for your buck. The sub-job for me don't really offer a lot of versatility for her. She does have some exceptional innate AP management, though. That is certainly a nice thing to see. The 50% Frostbite, though, is really nice for those physical damage enemies. We have not really seen Frostbite be super duper oppressive in PvP. Gilgamesh was probably the best unit that utilized that, and when done correctly, it actually is crippling for certain teams. She doesn't bring any of the same chaining upside for some of these recent missile units, where she's got no multi-hits in the kit. But she does have good Fight 2 utility for like second Guild War hits or defense, where she does have a 30% AoE heal to her allies. That certainly does help. As mentioned, notably the anti-Shreka unit. The Dad Bomb, Esper, and Vision card is not a requirement, but sort of is. Really, it just depends on if you want to integrate her with the gun teams. The Dad Bomb Vision card is a great overlap card for gun and bow. Now, there is no move -1 on the passive. It's on the weapon. Just want to reemphasize that. I've heard that manual players hate the move -1 passives. For the auto PvP, we don't mind it, but this is certainly a nice thing for a bow unit that a lot of those manual players, I think, should appreciate. And the last thing is to just reemphasize to you how grossly exceptional she is of a crit rate unit. So when it comes to any kind of crit damage upsides, this is a unit that can definitely take advantage of it. Now, I just wanted to go one step further on the anti-Shrek conversation, or really anti-Shrekdeath. The Limit Break is great versus both of those units, where it's re-raise removal for Xdeath, and it's a barrier break for both, and they both have barriers. If you're using Shrekdeath in a Lucille team, it's very possible that Shreka might also have re-raise, so this Limit Break will also dispel it in that instance too. We don't see it as much here in Global, but that was very popular in JP, so that's why I honorable mention him. That Diamond ability does dispel some valuable things from Shreka, though. It not only removes her follow-up, but also removes her damage absorb as well. On hit, she will also lower the enemy unit resistance penetration by 30%, which is the main source of damage for that Shrekdeath team. And having the buff efficacy, both Shreka and Xdeath have 30% penetrations tied to their offensive abilities. That this kind of buff, if you get the timing down properly, or even like late in the fight, you can have the efficacy of the amount of penetration they get. So I don't think it's like game breaking. Again, because I think debuff weakening does play a small factor into this, for Xdeath at least, but this is a really nice thing to try to be able to counter the amount of damage that they do. And admittedly, again, more anti-Shrek in particular than anti-Xdeath, where his debuff weakening does help mitigate some of Maevia's damage, where those imperils don't hit him for as hard. And obviously, he's way chunkier of a unit than her, so it's going to be harder to bring him down anyways, which is why I think that glass cannon component has to be emphasized. And admittedly, I don't think it's a hard counter for this team, but this is definitely one of the best units to bring to help bring that team down. Now, for the should you pull, for me, the answer is a no. It is a permanent pull unit that you can get more affordably down the line. I personally think there are alternative answers to that Shrekdeath team at the moment. I think the Light Veritas unit and some of the missile teams certainly have a case. The Pierce iteration teams do have options where they can beat this team as well. Some Thancred iterations and Monolight iterations I've seen do very well. Also, despite the fact that some people thought that Xdeath was going to just roll over King Mont, and I don't think that's the case quite yet, although maybe that's just this map that we're on where that doesn't seem to be the case. And to me, her upside really lies in accounts that are already well invested into units like Ice Jaden, the Gunner unit, Agrius, Gilgamesh. Do you have the Gun Vision cards, the Sword Red Mage Vision cards? So I think the team building is kind of limited at the moment, that I don't think she's a core piece to build off of. I think she's an accessory for your account if you've already built up your account for her. And for me, I think she requires some extra thinking and mocking compared to an average unit. And so from that perspective, I don't think she's going to give many players that same sense of satisfaction, where if you have a variable range of how effective she is, I don't think a lot of players are going to be able to get her upside. That's not a demerit against her upside, because her ceiling is certainly there. She certainly has a really strong meta use, no doubt about that. But I just think from a general gameplay perspective, she's not a must-have for most accounts. Now for the passive abilities, this top one you will always have equipped. That's the attack buff, the accuracy, the AoE pen, and the range +2. It's after this, though, that I think there can be some confusion for how you want to build her. Do you want to go for the agility %? For me, that's really about, tuning your teammate buffs. Do you want to go for the extra unit res here, which is kind of the anti-Shrekdeath theme, but this also gives her a 35% HP heal back. It's the only kind that she has in her kit. Very valuable component of some self-survivability. Debatable whether you need it or not. And the third option here, I think, is the good old-fashioned defense pen and the attack buff. You alternatively have an extra 60% attack buff here. So that's why I say when you want to tweak and tune the damage values of what you can do, you have two different passives here that do two different things in terms of attack and defense pen. I think it's a couple good options. I don't think I have a clear-cut second favorite. It's all going to depend on the matchup. The counter abilities, this is the good old-fashioned reflex. This is the chance to evade both physical and magic damage types. The main job buffs here, this large diamond, which is her first buff, is the 50% general damage barrier. It's the agility buff, the unit res buff, the decreased AP consumption. She was also giving herself 20 AP on this, and this is the really important on-hit effect of reducing enemy unit res pen. So this is absolutely a vital, valuable buff. The second one here is where she gives herself and teammate courage, but also is 25%. We call it Shell 2.0. It's a reduction of magical damage here, and it's an increase of range +1 as long as she has courage active. So both of these are very, very strong buffs. Debatable whether you could get a TMR buff off. It's not, obviously that's going to be map dependent. When we get to the main job offensive abilities, again, this third ability here, the diamond, is really her bread and butter. It's only 3 casts, but it's the 2-type Imperil, 200% mod. It's the Frostbite, it's the Dispel follow-ups, it's the Dispel damage absorb buff. This is absolutely the best ability in the kit, but this level 120 ability toward the bottom, that's where she gets that extra potential defensive penetration, as well as the decreasing of the efficacy of the buffs. This is a mistranslation on WOTV calc. This decrease reflect rate is really decrease buff efficacy. The Harvest Arrow is that missile 30% Imperil, certainly nice. In the Snowfang, again, it's nice that it has the extra hit chance, but she's not going to be actively using this ability unless it's more toward the end of the fight. So certainly nice in a pinch, but overall really confined, I think, to these bottom 2 abilities for her main source of damage. And then the limit break. This actually is a great limit break. It's the physical barrier break. This will apply to general barriers also. It's the Dispel Re-Raise and the Dispel of Protect 2.0. That's that physical damage reduction buff. Honestly, I like it. For the sub job, I think I'd stick with this one, quite frankly. The 25% Paralyze is certainly nice. I'm not really banking on it to land, but most people are not gearing against that status element at the moment, so you probably can get some good results in landing that, but I just don't know from an AI perspective how likely she is to use this right out of the gate. I think she's more likely to spam those other two abilities on her main job. I think Silver Healing, though, is certainly nice for second Guild War attacks, though, or second offensive attacks, where this is a restore of 30% HP. This is regardless of her magic stat. This is literally just whatever your ally's HP bar is, and restore 30% of it, plus or minus whatever healing power you might have. Now for the Hydra Goon, I might tinker with some of these buffs like Dragon Shell just to see the order of it, but overall I don't like any of the offensive abilities in this job for her, and same thing for Soldier. I don't like any of the offensive abilities here too, and there's really no buff upside here either, so to me I'm not even really thinking all that hard about either of these. And for the TMR review, this actually I think is a pretty legitimate TMR, particularly for ranged physical damage users, and this decreased hate of 6 means that you will get to attack 3 times before an enemy finally tries to target you alongside a teammate, and that 15% physical damage increase, by the nature that you won't be getting hit, means that you're not going to be getting that dispelled, and this is pretty commonly dispelled nowadays on a variety of places. Hero King Mont can dispel it on hit, Sephiroth can dispel it on hit, General Dispel can get rid of it, but if you have the negative hate, and if you're a ranged unit that's staying out of that attack range, I actually think you can get a full 4-turn duration of that 15% damage buff, which is absolutely noteworthy. So, although this is a cloth, it's got no agility, I actually think the TMR skill on here is a pretty noteworthy one for some damage thresholds. Now, the job-based vision cards, you know what? Bow is actually in a really good spot, and we've kind of been keeping an eye out for the new Bow unit that's been on the horizon, and Maevia is that unit. Bow has been included on a lot of recent vision cards, and they really do have some good synergies with Spear, Staff Black Mage. Gumi has just recently started amping up the crossover between gun and bow, but even Greatsword has some bones there for some team building too. I even think Book and Sword Red Mage and Katana all have enough there too that you can overlap a handful of those job-based vision cards and still get good results. Bow, in my opinion, at this time is probably one of the more well-rounded jobs from a vision card perspective. Now for unique equipment, this bow absolutely craft a copy of this for all ice units, which could include fun units like Rosa from Final Fantasy IV. This is an increase of Human Killer for physical attacks and move -1, but that will get removed after you've been hit once. But either way, that move -1 should last for a decent amount of time. The missile attack of 15. I'll be honest, I think either the Assault, the Aim, or Critical all have valid reasons to be built. Really just depends on the numbers at the end of the day, but you can never really go wrong going with the Assault build. The accuracy one, this number's nice, but not all that high. And the crit rate is nice, but might be overkill for us. So I got to run some calculations on that. But for the general optimization, I do think that weapon is the best for her. I think keeping that move -1 is really important for auto PvP. You can entertain Yoichi's bow, which is the Reliquary's weapon. It's not bad, but you lose that hate -1. And the Rune bow is a really hyper accurate weapon, but I don't think it's worth the trade-off of what you lose for the move -1. Again, purely from an auto PvP perspective. And the other equips, I don't think you have to overthink this. I think you can just go like Alexandrite Ring or Genji Glove and just go for that accuracy or the damage. Certainly the pod accessories always come in handy, but I think this is kind of the wheelhouse you want to stick with. And the Espers, I do think that Dad Bomb here is likely her best Esper, but you have cases to be made for Chariot even, which although is a magic-oriented Esper, has extra AoE res pen on it, which, again, her main abilities are those AoE scaling ones. But I do think Odin, Bahamut, Dark Odin, and Ultros, these all offer great things too in terms of man-killer modifiers and attack percent up. Ultros has the extra 20% defense pen on it, as well as some of the unit resistance. So I think you can play with all of these Espers. This is where, again, you want to pick one that probably just has the right agility value you're looking for, and trying to figure out which enemies you're hitting that these might do the most damage versus that type of enemy. And for the TMR, again, this is always variable for missile units because it frankly just depends on the range of the map, but I typically stick with agility TMRs. Now for my favorite teams, this is probably like one of the toughest things for me for this unit. Many ice variations synergize well because of the overlap between gun, Sword, Red Mage, and Bow. And just looking at JP, this seems to be where they're utilizing her the most. They're putting her in teams with Agrius and Gilgamesh, or Agrius and Jaden, or really any combination or iteration of these. But I do think that there is something to be said for her being a complementary partner to Mont to protect him against those Shrek and Xdeath teams where he's not awful against them, but certainly needs a little bit of help, and she is that unit to give them that help. And certainly Hero King Mont, with what he has on his personal vision card that just came out, he includes gun on his, so they've been, and missile on his, so they've been setting up the synergy here where Maevia to me is kind of in this wheelhouse. You could probably build her outside of these teams, but I just really don't know how effective they're going to be. And to me, this is like kind of one of those demerits against her where normally for these team building conversations, I can look at a unit and really like theory craft a bunch of different things. And I just don't know if I see that same thing for Maevia quite yet. Now for the Truststones, left side, always stick with the 4 different ailments potentially. I don't think you have to worry too much about hers because again, she should be out of range for most of those ailments, but I'm probably sticking with these top 4 for Disable, Doom, Sleep, and Curse. And then the borderline ones, maybe Berserk you consider, maybe Stun you consider for Venera, but I'm not thinking of as much for Maevia against these elements as some of the frontline units typically do. And then for the right side here, assuming you're using her unique weapon, I think these 6 are perfectly fine. I don't think we need missile resist penetration yet on these units because we're not seeing missile resistance get all that high in the game quite yet. If we were seeing units with 25%, 35%, 40% missile res, sure, throw in the penetration, but we're not quite there yet. And for a unit like Maevia, the absence of healing power here, and my recommendation, again, there's really not a lot in her kit that requires any kind of healing, and I've not really seen any teams where it requires a healer as well. I'm sure you can put a support into a missile team. But for her, I'm probably going as heavy on the offensive side as I can. And yeah, I'd go with the attack 20%, the defense 10, the ice attack 10, the dex of 15%, which is in her damage formula, as well as the crit rate, but also the crit rate of 10. I might put crit damage of 10, depending upon the numbers at the end of the day. But right now, crit evasion is pretty high that I think you just want to make sure you can land crit hits to begin with and go from there. But that's the Maevia review altogether. I'm sure a lot of people will watch this and look at that report card and kind of hear my tone and think that this is a bad unit or an underwhelming unit. And I don't think that's the case. I do think this is a good unit. I just don't think it's a must pull. I don't think it's an answer that a lot of people need. I think that I already see some counterplay being baked into her on the global side of things, where we've seen a very high adoption rate of Gilgamesh from Final Fantasy V, the fire unit, as well as Sephiroth still just being everywhere. And although she has this strong upside versus Xdeath and Shrek teams, I don't have the same confidence if suddenly people take out Xdeath and put in Sephiroth. I think that changes much of her ceiling, considering the fact that most teams have been putting her in mono ice iterations. And then just in general, missile has always been slightly boom or bust. At least the gun missile units as of late kind of got a couple really good units, a couple really great vision cards. The bow units just have not had that same impact. And so until I really see it hit home, I don't want to over-exaggerate things. Really solid unit, really great unit for those that know the game well. But otherwise, I think you can wait, get her in the permanent pool later, and build her up at that point. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to you all later.